Now, the UN has warned that a paradigm shift is needed to combat rising global temperatures as delegates gather in Brazil for the COP30 climate summit. In comments ahead of the climate summit, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz told his fellow world leaders that Germany can be relied upon to play its part. He called on all nations to work together and ensure that climate protection and the economy go hand in hand. But with the United States pulling out of these talks altogether, Germany and other developed nations are facing accusations that they've also become lukewarm on global warming.
The German Chancellor himself made it clear.
This government stands by the climate protection goals that we have agreed upon nationally, in Europe and internationally.
Germany does have a reputation for being a climate leader. And while experts say its plans to reduce emissions fall short of the international goals set to limit global warming, it does rank among the more ambitious countries. It has a well-developed climate policy with binding targets, including the goal of ending greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. But some signals and proposals by Chancellor Merz's government have raised concerns that Germany may not stay the course.
Even if Germany were to become climate neutral overnight, there would not be one less natural disaster in the world.
Statements like this one from the Chancellor, downplaying Germany's role in fighting the climate crisis, have raised alarm about his true commitment to cutting emissions. As did some remarks by his energy minister, who cast doubt on the feasibility of Germany's 2045 climate neutrality goal and on targets to increase renewable energy.
In recent months, Friedrich Merz has failed to chart a clear course on climate protection. Instead, he has contributed to uncertainty in German society.
It's not just about rhetoric. Climate experts are critical about some government climate policies, too. Like Germany's support for allowing EU emission reduction targets to be met, in part by funding climate-friendly projects abroad and not at home. Or Energy Minister Reich's plan to install at least 20 gigawatts worth of new gas power plants to compensate for gaps in the energy supply from renewable sources. She also wants to loosen requirements to phase out gas and push renewables for heating private homes. Germany's flatlined economy and tighter budget could also weaken its ambition to invest in the energy transition at home and contribute to much-needed climate financing abroad.
I believe the government needs to bring itself to see climate policy not primarily as an obstacle, an economic obstacle, but rather as something that has a lot to do with securing long-term prosperity.
With Chancellor Merz attending the COP's Leaders Summit in Belém, climate experts hope Germany will continue to lead as it has in the past. But with doubt lingering over Merz's commitment, it's now on him to prove that he actually means what he says on climate protection.
Joining me now in the studio is DW's chief climate reporter, Louise Osborne. Louise, let's talk about this and what we just saw there in our report. So highlighting, obviously, the concerns about the German Chancellor's commitment to climate action. So what signal is Germany going to be sending at these UN climate talks at this COP30?
I mean, yeah, as we saw, climate obviously has not been at the forefront of the agenda for the new government. And it was quite unexpected, that Chancellor Merz would be going to this conference at all. So I think it does send a signal to say that perhaps, you know, they are rethinking their stance on climate and that it is a key concern of the government, along with, you know, economic competitiveness and technological openness, which is what they've talked about.
And this all goes together, doesn't it, with climate action?
It actually does. I mean, there's dispute about that, but moving forward, it is what countries need to be doing, Germany as well. And this is a signal that they are showing commitment to moving forward on that they are positive about steps that can be taken, and that they are supportive of measures being taken by the Brazilian government, for example, on deforestation. And this is super important because Germany is still a big emitter, and it does need to take action.
Absolutely. OK, so we've got Chancellor Merz getting on a plane, flying for a lot of hours to go to Brazil. The US is largely absent from climate politics at the moment. Trump has made very clear he thinks climate change is a hoax. So could Germany, or to what extent could Germany and Europe fill that gap?
I mean, there's a big potential for them to fill that gap. And Germany has signified that it wants to, be one of the forefront runners when it comes to Europe in doing that. But there's a lot of infighting in the bloc itself. There are countries that are not supportive, for example, of targets that have just been approved for 2040. Countries like Hungary, Poland, Slovakia that were not standing by those targets. And there's been a lot of fear over the damage that some people think could be caused to competitiveness of the bloc through moving forward on the climate agenda.
It's a big discussion in Europe, isn't it, about getting more competitive, cutting red tape?
Exactly. And, in the competitive market against China, for example. But saying that, the EU has then backtracked as a result of this infighting on its targets. So, for example, this 90% reduction that they want to make by 2040 will now be made up of around 5% of carbon credits, which is quite a controversial way of cutting emissions. It essentially means that polluters can continue polluting and that the EU would then pay other countries to make those cuts for them. And this is a huge issue and something that, the EU needs to overcome if it really wants to take a leadership role when it comes to climate.
Right. Now, Brazil is hosting this year's UN climate talks, the COP30. We've heard Brazil's president, Lula, calling this the COP of truth. And he's basically saying we've got to get concrete results here, especially on climate finance. Are there signs that wealthy countries like Germany, for example, are going to talk less, do more, and actually follow through on their commitments at these talks?
I mean, all of the countries have been required in the last few months to submit new targets when it comes to how they're going to reduce carbon emissions. But they are coming too slowly. So whatever action they do want to take, they need to do it more quickly so that they can meet those goals and keep temperatures lower.
We've got to leave it there. Louise Osborne, thank you so much.
DW's chief political editor Michaela Küfner is in Brazil and was listening to the speech by the German Chancellor there. Michaela, a call for collective action from the German Chancellor. What else stood out to you in his speech?
Well, so far it was same procedure, wasn't it? Germany has been and remains a leading country when it comes to protecting the environment, to taking a lead on climate change protection. At the same time, we saw a chancellor here who's under a lot of pressure to deliver on economic growth. He promised that to get elected. And that this is not a contradiction. That's what the previous German government also tried to prove with intermediate success. And Friedrich Merz here is adamant that, yes, Germany will keep to its commitments. He kind of said between the lines that it will also keep up the spending. It was to the tune of 6 billion euros in public money in 2024. That was the largest amount ever spent by a German government. So we don't really expect that to go down. But then there's very concrete examples where Germany itself is trying to dilute even the European climate goals. And that's when it comes to wanting to postpone the effective end of the combustion engine, which would require to be CO2 neutral if it was to continue from 2035. Well, he's shifting that goalpost. He's convincing other EU countries that that is too soon. That's what's behind the term Technologieoffenheit, being flexible on which technology is used. And there's a very concrete fear behind that the auto industry in Germany simply is still unable to make a profit with its e-vehicles. So these are interests he's clearly weighing up. Also, when he remains an undisputed champion, that's what Germany is, of climate protection. But many, particularly smaller countries feeling the brunt of this crisis, want more action and they want it fast.
Ahead of this trip to Brazil, the opposition criticized Friedrich Merz, saying he's not a credible advocate for international climate action. To what extent does he want Germany to take a leading position in the efforts being negotiated there in Berlin?
Look, it was fairly easy to be in a leading position at this climate conference simply by showing up. A lot of the big countries didn't. Narendra Modi is not here. The Chinese are not here at the presidential prime minister. Just the deputy prime minister is here. Still, they're being seen as a potential champion in the future. And the Americans, they left the Paris Climate Accord once again under Donald Trump. So there is somewhat an erosion of that potential leadership. And here Germany is standing strong, but it's not going out of its way to double up, despite the fact that Chancellor Merz he did pledge that he would make a significant contribution. We don't really know how much exactly, but we understand it will be somewhere around about the billion that Brazil has put into this new fund to protect rainforests across the globe.
How will Germany and other European nations there at COP try and compensate for the absence of some of the world's biggest polluters?
Well, first of all, by being here, by making financial pledges. This is really what smaller nations particularly want to see, and I think that this will go down to the very last moment. But we do see that scientists are raising the alarms, as they do every year, that is true, but that we are way beyond the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal right now, and that very urgent action is needed. There are many countries who simply cannot afford to do that, and they expect compensation, they expect help, and this is all against the backdrop of budgets for development assistance being cut across the globe. The US has basically almost scrapped them, and Germany has also cut them down significantly. So very tough times for very concrete commitments at this COP.
Michaela Küfner in Berlin. Thank you so much, Michaela.